Boosts your immune system.
Webcam microphone up close. Webcam microphone up close.
At the age of 19 in 1962, she was
but I have the files. I read this stuff at the National Archives, and I read these other things. I said to myself, how can that be possible? The brain, days and the frontal slab of choice, I don't know when that was, doesn't really matter. Internet, professional wrestlers, and not Jesse Ventura style. It doesn't matter where the information comes from as long as it's real. It's hard to get real information. Because seriously, they don't want you to have these two sources whenever I try to prove out. It's not. If you expect your government to tell you the truth, you're going to be sadly disappoint another one of these things.
Dear Lord, what a dirty, dirty old man.
Really? Can't be serious. Is this really how you want things to be? Come on. More hooker, eruptions, eruptions, whatever. Really?
Allegedly broadcast live from Pima Region 2. Within the borders of the formerly united and currently occupied states of America, we bring you the Ochelli Effect.
I damn sure know I'm an original.
We have...
Okay, and it is Saturday night, so you know what that means. It's the Ochelli Effect. I'm Chuck Ochelli, your host. Tonight, I'm going to bring you a new guest, somebody who generally doesn't do radio interviews, but I found her to be rather interesting. Her name is Christine LeBlanc, and I think I stopped on the C there and didn't make that noise, so I said it right. And she is the event coordinator for the New Brunswick part of the tour for Architects and Engineers 9/11, which is the Rethink 9/11 tour in Canada. And she's also the science advisor, recently appointed to that position, and all that kind of good stuff. Christine, are you still with me?
Yeah, I'm here.
All right, wonderful. I did it right then.
Yeah.
All right. So tonight, Christine, we wanted to talk about a few things. This is a little different than the Richard Gage interview, and I wanted to continue on with the 9/11 subject. Last week I had someone else scheduled, but turned out not to work out. So what we're going to do now is delve into a little bit about yourself and the types of stuff you do, because you are a researcher as well and somebody who is rather concerned about this issue. So I wanted to get your point of view and your words on that and discuss, the valid way of gathering evidence and stuff like that. But I'm going to now shut up and listen to you, Christine. Go ahead.
Well, thanks for having me, Chuck. Well, just to give you a little background about myself, in terms of the research, I'm a healthcare worker and healthcare researcher, and in healthcare, you do use a lot of different types of research. There's the kind of pure scientific research right to the sociological research, and so the graduate work that I did was on how to do it, how to evaluate it, how to make decisions using it. And so that's kind of what I've tried to bring to 9/11 for the short time that I've been doing it. That's what I intend to bring, at least as science advisor. So that's basically my story. Also the event coordinator, for the New Brunswick part of Rethink 9/11. That's the Cross Canada tour that Richard Gage is doing for, Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth in March. And, I think he brought that up last week. And so I'm doing 3 cities in New Brunswick, and, we're also doing a documentary of that grassroots movement. And, so that's more of an administrative position where I'm going to help organize it. So I've kind of got 2 roles now.
Right. The interesting thing about the 9/11, research community has been for me to watch it evolve. And I've seen a lot of, we've heard a lot of noise about this stuff, and we've seen a lot of, theorizing and guesswork and really, a lot of sort of, I don't know how else to go about it. I mean, the critics call it kooky or conspiracy theorist based nonsense. And you know what? Some of it is, but there's certainly something very, very wrong with the official story. And the fact is that, the way that we need to start to evaluate these types of claims and all this stuff is really, really important. And that's one of the things that really got my attention when I was trying to interact with you about a few things. So, what is it that you'd like to say about that? I mean, I know that, you're in support of the architects and engineers, and there must be a reason for that.
Sure. The reason is that they are basically, they base their claims on evidence and on science and on a transparent, peer-reviewed methodology of trying to figure out what actually happened. And that's why that appeals to me, because that's what I do. That's part of my role. And that's why they appeal to me, and they're very focused as well, and I see them as probably the most powerful organization for actually bringing a more scientific view to 9/11. What I have noticed in what I've been looking at is that the people who are trying to refute the 9/11 truth movement, there's a lot of name calling. There's a lot of claims, but there's not really a lot of basis in science or even in social science to back up their claims. And there's a lot of holding back information and not putting information out for peer review. So that's sort of my point of view as to the 9/11 truth movement and their critics. That makes sense.
No, I understand that. That's exactly where I'm at with all this stuff. And I've always said over the years that the JFK research community, which I was personally involved in, was definitely plagued by this kind of stuff also, where people make these wild sort of speculations. Now, speculation is part of the scientific process of truly evaluating evidence. Obviously first, you make a thesis. In a lot of cases, people create a thesis because they've sort of gathered that this is an idea. And then a hypothesis or a hypothesis is then developed after that. So you now have a hypothesis, but sometimes what happens is people's sort of gleaned guesswork is almost becomes represented as evidence, as opposed to taking evidence and seeing whether it supports it or works against the hypothesis in the first place. And I find that to be one of the most disingenuous things that occurs in all of these types of sort of controversial topics, any of this stuff where people try to, or seem to try to educate the public in some way, is that they really have not gone after the good evidence or the good support for their hypotheses as it may be. And I think that that's extremely important. And this is what it's about. So when it comes down to that, when you're talking about trying to support a hypothesis and evaluating evidence, and not just from a physics standpoint, I'm very sure, not just from a solid sort of science standpoint, but also, as you mentioned, in the social science area. Would you like to talk about that a little bit?
Well, there's basically many different types of research. I think what you've referred to is the more pure scientific type, where you come up with a hypothesis and you come up with a test of it, and then the more you're able to support your hypothesis, eventually you're going to come up with a theory. There's that form of research that's the one we often associate with the word research, but in fact, there's other different types of research that you do. And so, for instance, if you were going to try to figure out what happened to one of the World Trade Centers, you wouldn't necessarily go that route. You would basically look at what happened and try to figure out what happened, because it's already happened. So it's more of an investigation rather than a looking forward. It's kind of a looking back and trying to figure out what happened. You can do that in economics. You can do that in a lot of different areas. And that's what didn't happen. That's exactly what didn't happen, is that they didn't actually look at the evidence. They a lot of the evidence was destroyed. They used mathematical models in order to try to simulate what they decided they wanted to say happened to the towers, especially Building 7. Well, all three, but Building 7 especially. And mathematical models are generally used to try to make predictions and decisions about things that you would later test to make sure that it actually works. So, for instance, it does get used in healthcare, for instance. You could use some maybe vaccine or something like that, and you would put the data into your mathematical model, and then you could try to predict in the future how many people it would save. That's how you use a mathematical model. You don't use it instead of actually looking at the real stuff like the steel and all of the actual evidence, and the science behind it. You don't use your mathematical model instead of that and then just say, okay, well, that's it. And that's what they did. And,
So this is more of an attempt to sort of reconstruct based on the pieces that can be gathered, in other words. So you don't begin with a hypothesis. You simply gather the most pieces, reconstruct it from those pieces of evidence. And I don't mean just the physical parts, obviously, but even the occurrences, the witness statements. When you reconstruct the entire occurrence, what you're doing then is building it without any sort of predetermined idea as to where you're going. And in that way, the investigation leads you to the conclusion or to the hypothesis, which is then built on the evidence, as opposed to taking the hypothesis and then building the evidence behind it.
Right. Yeah. It's more like, a crime or something, police that are actually looking into a crime, who murdered, so-and-so, that sort of thing, where you kind of have to keep, your eyes open wide in order to see everything and then try to drill it down to what the most likely explanation is. And that's what didn't happen.
And it did not happen in this case. And whether we're talking about the purely scientific models which NIST used, right? This is one of the biggest points that has been made by architects and engineers. Am I right?
Right. They used a mathematical computer model. And you can do anything you want with these models. It all depends on what you put into them. And that's part of the issue. For instance, for Building 7, it's not clear what they put in, but it's very clear that they didn't use the steel. They didn't use the evidence that they had in front of them. They just basically kept inputting things until they got something close to the story. I mean, that's sort of the long and short of it. And that's just not the way you would normally use a mathematical model. You would use that to try to foresee something. And then later, in the future, you would actually test your mathematical model against what actually happened. And that's not going to happen either, So, it's not really the way you would normally do an investigation to use this sort of method. This is, what can I say?
So it was a very unsound method that NIST used in the first place, because they were, and by the way, this is the National Institute of
Standards and Technology.
I always mix that up and say it's science and technology, but it's standards and technology more correctly.
And they are under the Department of Commerce.
And they were charged with explaining these things from an actual physics standpoint, exactly how the collapses occurred and all that, right?
Well, physics, chemistry, for sure. And whether or not they had the capability of doing it, I don't know. I mean, there's that whole political aspect that, the Department of Commerce is their boss, so to speak. And they have a secretary who's part of the cabinet, right?
Right.
The cabinet is part of the government. So it's kind of like a policeman investigating himself for a murder he's been accused of committing. It's kind of the same thing.
Well, right. Like when you have a situation where intelligence agencies could obviously be, part of the prime suspect list. Again, I refer to my experience with the JFK assassination. And then you find that the President's Commission, which was appointed to investigate the situation, was almost even though it was named the Warren Commission, was practically headed by a guy like Allen Dulles, who was the fired head of the CIA under Kennedy. Right. Not only did he have an axe to grind, but he had other possible motives if his agency was even remotely involved in the cover-up or the action that led to the president's death. It is virtually a situation where the fox is investigating the henhouse. And that's precisely what we have here, right?
Well, it is. I mean, at least there should have been an appearance of no conflict of interest. I mean, there just wasn't. Well, when they set it up and they said, oh yeah, we're going to have like a really objective sort of very transparent investigation, that just doesn't happen when it's part of the government already. So just from the start, you could sort of question that. But then when they use these methods that have been widely criticized by scientists across the world, and researchers and architects and engineers and academics, and many people have criticized, and basically they just keep saying, well, that's our findings and that's it. So it's really, at this point, it's really going to be the movement that's going to try to force their hand in some way, I think. There's a couple of movements that are trying to get investigations into Building 7.
Right. And connected directly to architects and engineers actually is, Dr. William Pepper, who is also, who's also a lawyer and a barrister in, England. But, he is, part of the legal action which is beginning now to be taken by architects and engineers. And for those who may not be familiar with William Pepper, you can find him involved in a lot of different things over the years, including, most notably to me anyway, the Martin Luther King assassination, where the civil trial was brought in Memphis, Tennessee in 1999, and that was actually brought by the family, I believe it was Dexter King, but it was, his son, and the King family basically calling for a serious show up in court of the real evidence instead of just simply blaming this lone assassin as usual.
Right.
And when they did that, they won that court case, and the mainstream media has ignored it. But Dr. Pepper, again, when looking at another situation, you want to talk about what he's doing?
Well, basically, kind of the history as far as Building 7 was that after they came out with their final report, I believe in 2008, I think it was architects and engineers, or at least people who are on the board of architects and engineers, asked for a correction of the glaring errors that were in it, or at least correcting their assumptions. And they basically said, nope, we're going to keep it the same. So then they appealed, and then they've not gotten anywhere with that. So the only thing they can do, there's something called the Data Quality Act, and I think that's what they were going with when they were insisting on the corrections in the NIST report, because there is some sort of law or policy, I'm not sure what it is, but in the U.S., that data that is produced by government, I believe something like that, needs to be useful and accurate. So they didn't get anywhere with their appeal. So what has happened now is that they've got Dr. William Pepper. He has basically sent them a letter. Now, this is not the start of legal action yet. What it is, though, is... I
misspoke then there. I thought he was already beginning, but I guess this is the initial steps to it.
Well, it is. I had to clarify that with Richard today, actually. I wanted to know if this was based on the Data Quality Act. It turns out that this is actually more of a letter to put them on notice, and is actually to the U.S. Department of Commerce. So it's the overseeing body to NIST, asking them to please fix or correct a couple of inaccuracies in their report.
Right, since NIST is under the control of the Department of Commerce, essentially, this means that they addressed it to their controllers, essentially saying that your sub-agency of sorts has been, I don't remember the exact language in the letter, but I know I've seen it. And he says that, essentially there are, how did he put it?
Well, he basically, he talks about, hold on here. He's basically telling the Department of Commerce that they've tried to get somewhere with NIST to get them to correct their report, and they've gotten nowhere. So the part that they're interested in is that there was a couple of really important things that were omitted in the NIST model, and that included critical girder support and lateral support beams. And I think the claim that they're making in this letter is basically that that model and the outcome of their model could not possibly happen if they had included the girder support and the lateral support beams, and that they need to fix it or else they may seek legal recourse.
Right, and I believe they basically stated that that thus far the actions of NIST has been completely unacceptable.
Yeah.
In that it's fully inaccurate, and and that we're basically asking you, as the people that are in charge of this department, to address this. And thus far, we have made reasonable requests with very specific details.
Yes.
And for not just listen, we want answers, give us some new answers, but very specifically, structured questions about those models and NIST's involvement and all this kind of stuff. I mean, obviously, if you turn around and you give them a model that doesn't include large, serious factors in the data, and you say this is, extremely comparable to what happened in that building, then what you're looking at is something that's really disingenuous at best, flawed without question, and possibly even criminally deceptive.
Yeah. No, it's hard to come to any other conclusion really when such clear. I mean, I'm not an architect or an engineer, or I don't do construction, but it seems to me that not including critical girder support and lateral support beams is fairly important and wouldn't be easily missed unless you on purpose didn't put it in. It's similar for the World Trade Towers. They did something very similar. I mean, they did a few actual tests, but, like real tests, which didn't go the way they wanted. And
I don't believe they included all the data from those tests either, did they?
Well, they did something very similar. They did something similar.
Where some of the conditions or the parameters were removed so that it
kind
was
of kept playing with it, and they basically, I think they actually added more force than they were supposed to, and the models are just not. The models just aren't accurate at all. I mean, it's as simple as that, I guess. And you have to talk about the destruction of the evidence too. There was lots of destruction of evidence. I mean, all that steel was gone in no time.
Well, that stuff was hauled away right away, in fact.
Yeah, it was. You gotta wonder what the hurry was, but.
Well, that is a curious.
It just in no way was a typical investigation of anything, It was, when evidence is destroyed in that way and is taken away before the scientists, FEMA didn't even get a chance to look at it much, I don't think. How do you expect to come to the proper conclusion?
Well, right. And you have to begin to wonder about the motive of a supposedly investigative organization that is in such a big hurry to clear away this stuff. They stored some of these things, in some very large, I don't remember the exact types of buildings, but they were large storage type buildings, similar to airplane hangars at one point. Okay. I know that there were pieces stored there, and I know that firsthand, that this stuff was stored, a lot of it, in these large sort of containment buildings, and that access was not granted to very many people. That is for sure, because I was attempting to look into this stuff in 2002, and the fact is that even during the cleanup, this stuff was being destroyed before cleanup had even begun to even seem remotely finished, or even having made great progress.
And I think that was despite the calls of professionals, in fire safety and forensics for buildings and stuff. I think that there was quite an outcry to stop doing it. I don't even know if it's lawful. I mean, you might know, but I'm not even sure if it was lawful what they did.
Well, generally speaking, when you're talking about a murder or a crime scene where a murder has been committed, in this country anyway, the first thing that is usually done is that they turn around and they isolate and secure the scene. Okay, so that no contamination of evidence can be had, so that evidence doesn't simply disappear by walking away, either being stolen or removed or tampered with by individuals who have an interest, or even people that don't have an interest, inadvertently tampering with, destroying, removing, or altering evidence in order to change the outcome in one way or another, whether it's been done intentionally or not. Mm-hmm. And that absolutely wasn't done, and it wasn't even done in a remote control sort of way. And I don't mean remote control by, electronic remote control, but what I mean is that they didn't even turn around and create a portion of the crime scene where they had a controlled area and they gathered the evidence purely from there, because the thrust of everything at that time was to clean it up, to put out the fires, to try and find people. And if the destruction of all that evidence had come into play simply because they were attempting to dig people out and save lives, you felt almost as if that might have been somewhat justified. Mm-hmm. But it went far beyond that. Yeah. It went far beyond that. And when they distorted, destroyed, removed, and absolutely in all ways that you could possibly imagine, at least from my standpoint, tampered with and altered the evidence irrevocably. So from a logical standpoint, and this is what we're talking about, is that there's a very serious lack of logic in the way that the evidence was collected, analyzed, and then presented to the public.
Well, it's just a very atypical way for it to be done. I mean, the United States and many other developed countries, there's a very well-established way of taking care of these things and learning from them. And it was just completely anomalous for it to happen this way. If you have a building that is supposed to fall in approximately 6 seconds, and I'm talking about building 7 now, falls in 6 seconds, you can't make your bed in 6 seconds, like a 47-story building falling in 6 seconds. And then, you just don't really investigate it right, and you use some models, and then that's it. Like, okay, if fire can bring down a 47-story building in 6 seconds, then there needs to be a change. They need to look into this. Is it safe to go into any high rise? Like, should we be worried? I work in a fairly large building, and when there's a fire, they close the fire doors, but we don't expect it to collapse in 6 seconds. So, and that's ultimately what the NIST report has said, is that it's due to the fire. They've dropped the whole diesel fuel thing, and they've dropped the thing about the debris falling from the other towers. They're saying that a fire basically loosened a particular part of the building, and then it just collapsed in seconds. And
that is particularly troublesome. And
it is.
In addition to them challenging NIST, Architects and Engineers is also running a campaign to create a safer buildings. It's the Safe Building Initiative, I believe it is, right?
That's called the High Rise Safety Initiative.
There we go.
Yeah.
Okay, and that addresses this kind of thing where, am I right? This is the kind of thing that addresses.
Well, what it is they want. Can I give you the website right now?
Oh yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Okay, it's highrisesafetynyc.org. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to get, make it so that, a reinvestigation into Building 7 is on the ballot for New York City, which would force New York City to do a brand new proper investigation. And they need, 15,000 signatures, I think. Well, I don't know exactly how many signatures, but they need New York residents, the city of New York residents, to sign this petition so that they can force New York City to actually do an investigation themselves,
Right.
which would stand apart from the NIST one.
Right. Well,
so
this
is very, very important for people who live in New York who actually want answers based on science. Well, we would hope they would do a good job, but anyway, this is something. They should.
Either way, these are separate efforts, but they are connected. And I just wanted to make sure that we mention that as well. I mean, I'm not.
Sure. I was going to mention that actually. That's super important. Very important. That may be one of the most important things, because if they manage to get this as a law, then you have a lot more power. You have you actually have a tool to actually get the investigation done, because it's a law now. So it has the force of law. And that's important, because that's kind of what's missing right now. Like, they can kind of skirt around it and stuff. And if it's actually voted as a law for New York City, I think that would be huge. A huge, huge move forward.
And quite factually, if that law had been in place when Building 7 fell, then we would not have the types of questions that exist now. And it would have changed the entire character of the investigation from day one.
Well, there kind of was I think there is, I don't know if it's a law, but there's certainly a policy to really do a good investigation of any building that fails. I mean, to my knowledge, there's never been 3 skyscrapers that have actually fallen at free fall speed.
Well, I'm very sure of this, that on never before in the history of architecture have there been 3 of these steel framed cement reinforced buildings that completely failed due to fire. That's a guarantee.
Same day, yeah.
And if they never occurred before in history, it is rather noteworthy that all 3 of the first 3 occurred that day in New York City.
That's right. And it's interesting because, even when you try to bring a building down like that, I don't know, I think it might be Richard who has who shows a few videos of failed demolitions and what happens. Like, it's not easy to bring a building down at free fall speed. This is a major undertaking, and it doesn't always work. And he's got some interesting videos of that, and I thought that was really eye-opening as to how difficult it actually is. And these were 110 stories, these 2 twin towers. So it's pretty impressive that they came down in about 10 seconds, I think, for them.
And I find it fascinating that a lot of the skeptics or debunkers often like to say that, you got to understand exactly how complex it is to purposely demolish a building like these, and how insane it is to say that it must have been done in some way purposely. In fact, they're making our point for us.
Yeah, they really are. They really are, because as difficult as it is to plan it, having fire do it is near impossible. It just doesn't happen.
And having 3 of them collapse coincidentally by chance.
Yeah.
I mean, that's almost like saying I walked up to 3 particular machines in Las Vegas and pulled the handle today, and therefore all 3 of them struck a jackpot when I did.
Right. And I heard one debunker say, oh, well, gravity does amazing things. Well, it's true, but that's why they build these buildings to counteract gravity. I mean, these World Trade Centers, from my understanding, were built incredibly strong. They were able to withstand many, many, many times over what they had gone through, even with the planes crashing into them, which they were designed to handle, as it turns out.
Right. They were actually designed at the time to withstand, and I do mean actually maintain their structural integrity.
Yeah.
If they had sustained a strike from a Boeing 707, which was the larger of the planes at the time that was in the air.
Yeah, which is similar to the planes that hit them in size. And then when they came up with the whole the jet fuel melting the steel, well, they also, I'm sure, foresaw that a plane was going to have jet fuel when it hit the buildings. Anyway, jet fuel is just kerosene. it's the same kind of fuel that you use all the time.
And then the conditions that the fires were under, which is quite evident by the types of smoke that were released.
Yeah, that's right. They were starving of oxygen. Yeah.
Which is why you have that black
wood
smoke.
Stove knows a couple of things. They know that their wood stove does not melt from the fire that's inside, and that when they don't give good oxygen to their fire in their wood stove, their entire house fills with smoke. I've had a wood stove and I know how bad that is. So if you starve a fire, you get all this black smoke, and that's something we can look at and say this is evidence of a poorly fed fire.
Which would directly influence the temperature and all of that.
Oh, yeah, certainly. Yeah, it would. Yeah,
now,
absolutely. Yeah.
To catch a few people up on what it is, in case people are misunderstanding some of the things we're talking about here.
Sure.
When we're talking about Building 7,
yeah,
there was a campaign some years ago about, building what? And
that's right.
The reason was that, I don't know if you want to address the reason for that.
Well, I think the reason was that, except for the day except for 9/11, it was pretty much shut out of the media. Nobody talked about it. There was a little bit here and there, but in general, people really didn't hear about it. So, that's why a campaign, I think it was called Remember Building 7 or something. And, because
maybe it was the posters said building what or something like this, I think.
Yeah, it may be. I think now it might be called Remember Building 7. Hold on, I have it right here. Remember Building 7, and there's a link to that. They have a website. It's called rememberbuilding7.org.
Okay.
And it's because it's a little bit easier than the Twin Towers to sort of question it pretty strongly because it was not hit by a plane. So you've got that element gone, and it went down suddenly about, I don't know, was it around 7 or 8 hours later in the afternoon after being predicted to go down, at around 1 p.m. by one of the American, stations. I'm not sure which one. And then I believe it was the BBC that said it had gone down about approximately an hour before it actually did. So there's a lot of really suspicious kind of things that happened around that building. Not to mention who the tenants were.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and rather curious.
Yeah, the New York Office of Emergency Management, Securities and Exchange Commission, U.S. Secret Service, and quite a few financial companies. So, this was probably a very secure building. And so how it came down in about approximately 6 seconds from a couple of fires, it just doesn't make sense from a research, from an evidence perspective. It doesn't make sense.
And taking that notion just a bit further, the fact is that if these offices were there were various records kept there, and I think it's very worthwhile for people to try and examine what types of records and what types of evidence of other situations would have been destroyed.
Yeah, I think people have actually looked into that, and I'm not privy. I don't actually know what they found, but I did hear that there were several investigations that were going on into some financial wrongdoing. So there's that. But I know there's other people who know more about that than I do. That's just sort of something that I've heard another speaker say.
But just speaking about that day in particular, I mean, we're not even gonna touch on the Pentagon here, really. But the fact is that
that's an interesting one.
that's also interesting in that the exact area of the Pentagon that was struck by the supposed plane, the alleged plane that was allegedly striking that particular part of the building, and all of this.
Yeah, it's even more basic than that. How did the Pentagon get hit at all? Because
that was my
two
wonder.
Buildings had just gotten hit. In the U.S., many tax dollars go towards the military, known throughout the world to be the most sophisticated military in the world. How does the Pentagon get hit when about an hour before 2 other buildings, their biggest buildings in the U.S., got hit? Like, it just Never mind what happened to it. The fact that anything happened to it at all blows my mind.
Well, it's beyond amazing that during perhaps the highest alert in, air security history.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and there was like 47 exercises going on that day, keeping all of the defense, the air defense, kind of occupied. It's just very strange. Very, very strange. I mean, we probably don't have time to get into it too much. And that is probably the most contentious issue as far as what happened. Did a plane hit it? Was a bomb? What was it? But as far as I'm concerned, the fact that anything happened to it at all is enough. Nothing should have happened to the Pentagon. This is the Pentagon.
Oh, right. Right, exactly. I mean, but the fact is, again, though, I just can't stress enough that if you think about what was destroyed,
Oh, yeah.
Regardless of, when you begin to look at motive when you're examining something from an investigator standpoint.
Yeah,
one of the
that's
things
important when you're doing research too. You do have to follow the motive, the who had something to gain, for sure.
The old cui bono equation, if you will. Yeah, absolutely. And but anyway, back to New York City again.
Yeah.
A lot of other fascinating things were found, which I am a little bit confused about. I got to be honest with you.
Okay.
And the amazing part to me about this and about the misconceptions that are involved here is a lot of it had to do with the media. And I know that architects and engineers doesn't necessarily have the largest sort of discussion about the media coverage out there. But
no,
I do know
they're good at being focused on what they're good at. Yeah.
Right. But I do know that you have some particular views about the media and their coverage. And I was really curious to share it with the audience, what it is that you thought about the, what I always refer to as the shock and awe of the actual trauma-based programming that occurred there.
Yeah.
The influence over, I mean, you're Canadian, by the way.
Yeah.
Which I don't think
I go to the States quite a bit. I mean, we feel very close to, the people of the U.S. I just came back from Florida, actually, a couple of weeks ago.
Well, it was warmer there a couple of weeks ago.
A little bit.
But the thing is that, there was sort of a constructed viewpoint that was given to us.
Yeah.
And why is it relevant is because it basically made it more acceptable for us to go and invade places like Afghanistan and Iraq and stuff like that. But I know that you have some views on, how that media coverage was handled and some thoughts on it. And I know it's not directly connected to architects and engineers, but I would love to hear what you have to say about that as well.
Well, I can only kind of give my impressions of what I sort of noticed. Now, back when it happened, I was in the mall and I just watched it happen in a Radio Shack, actually, and the second tower had just gotten hit, I believe. And I thought that was really odd that two buildings got hit, what was going on, but that they would be, I didn't actually think they would fall. I mean, I know enough, I've got enough physics training and to think, well, I think they're going to stand that. There they are standing there and there's some fires, but they're stable. And then after that, it was like everything was just this is what it was. This is how it happened. And now we're doing this. And that was it. You just followed along with that. And, me, just like everyone else, you got a life to live and you kind of have to move on with your life. So, what I did notice though later on when there started to be a few more questions and a few people sort of breaking from that official narrative and starting to criticize it, on certain channels, especially in the U.S., they would do a lot of name calling. There would be a lot of, discrediting, But there wasn't really a good balanced coverage in any way, and there certainly wasn't anything about Building 7. I remember Stephen Jones actually being on there, and he was trying to show Building 7 going down, and I think I don't remember which. I think we can probably guess which network it was, but I'm not going to say because I'm not sure. They just kept claiming that there was a problem with the tape, and then they finally said, "Okay, goodbye."
Well, I'm pretty sure that if I remember correctly, and I may be wrong too, but I'm pretty sure that was Fox News.
Well, that's probably a good assumption, but I think it was. But it struck me as, wow, like, that's when I started to realize, like, come on, you don't have technical difficulties like that. Like, this is just a little piece of a video. And he kept saying, are you going to show the tape? And they're like, yeah, we're trying, or something like that. And I thought, wow, there's just really they're just really not going to tolerate any sort of criticism or any sort of talk at all. They're just going to vilify everyone who thinks that maybe the official narrative isn't true. Now in Canada, there was a tiny bit more balance, but not much. There was a program on CBC, The Fifth Estate, they didn't really deal with the science, but they certainly did a good job at kind of checking out the political connections and things like that. So that was fairly well balanced. But, I guess I don't know if I've answered your question or not, but,
well,
it
it's
certainly
okay.
wasn't balanced. Yeah.
I really just wanted your thoughts on it because I always find it fascinating to gather all types of people's impressions about it, because I've said it before and I'll say it again. I was very much sucked into, into the idea that we as a people had just been given a serious black eye.
No, it's true. I mean, I sort of parted ways a little bit with the Iraq thing. The Afghanistan thing, I mean, I didn't really question too much what had happened. Again, I was pregnant with my second child at the time, and, life goes on, and you expect that a decent investigation is going to get done, and that they know what they're doing, and that they know who actually did it. And there was no real question. So when they went into Afghanistan, it's like, okay. I was a little worried about, some of the Patriot Act. That did seem a little scary. But, it seemed like, we were living in extraordinary times, and maybe that was warranted. I don't know. But the Iraq thing is, I think, where I know Canada certainly stood apart from the US and the UK on that. And that's when that's when I started to think, wow, this is getting a little too far.
Right. And and sadly, the way that people consume junk food basically for their brains in this country, they accepted the idea that we were going to invade Iraq, based on the assumption that we were doing it because they were somehow linked to 9/11. And, the madness of that, really struck me. And it's like, oh, here we go with another illegal, unfounded, unwarranted incursion into another sovereign nation. Right. And it had happened before. And of course, Afghanistan is very questionable.
Well, it is in retrospect.
In retrospect, but at the time, as you say, at the time, I mean, I just felt very defensive and said, well, this is what we have to go do. And a lot of Americans were basically screaming for blood because they felt personally, injured by this.
Well, it was traumatizing for, I think, the whole world, but especially for U.S. citizens. It really was traumatizing to have that happen on that day. So you needed to find who did it, and you wanted to address it, And I think people wanted to feel safe, and then it seemed as if that was some sort of route just to being safe. And Well,
right. I mean, but just as in any murder, you essentially want the bad guy brought to justice.
That's right.
Either you want his head or you want him in prison for the rest of his life, because this is so horrible. And this was the overlying kind of thing that sort of took people. But I really think it started to translate into people not thinking and simply responding to what the media kept parroting repeatedly. And
Well,
I think that can't be said enough.
No, there's that. And there's also the real, one of the things I think I recommended you to look at was the 9/11 Toronto hearings. And not only do they present the scientific aspect of 9/11, but they also present the psychological and social aspect. It's really hard for people to accept what they have to accept once they realize that Building 7, for instance, fell at free fall speed, and the only thing that can possibly explain that is a controlled demolition. What you have to accept after that is heart-wrenching. It makes you feel sick. I felt sick when I looked into it again and realized what that meant. I felt sick to my stomach. And even recently, I was talking to a colleague and I was explaining to her some of the things I was doing with 9/11, and she says, "Christine, I hear you, and I believe everything you're saying, but what you're asking me to accept, it's just too hard." And I think that is a lot of it as well, So when you're being fed this by the media, and it's so hard to accept, what the implications are, everybody just kind of has to live their life, and you have to work, and you have to raise your kids, and you have to, do all these things. It's kind of easy. It's just kind of like the path of least resistance to just sort of say, okay, well, that's the story and that's it. So I think we really have to address that. I think that's probably an important part that the movement is going to have to address is how terrible people feel when they realize that what they're saying happened to the buildings is impossible from a physics point of view, from a physics and chemistry point of view. It's just not possible. It would be like living in the Twilight Zone. Like, you wouldn't be able to go into a tall building and feel safe, but we do. Right. And once you've accepted that, it's like, wow, what does that mean then? And that's the part that keeps people from looking at it anymore. It's like, it's too much for me to handle right now. I just can't.
And the other argument which I have encountered when I attempted to discuss 9/11 with all types of individuals, the other problem that I found was, listen, I don't want to believe such a dark and deep conspiracy theory. And I say to them, well, then I guess that means that you don't accept the official story either, because if you want to talk about a dark and deep conspiracy theory, that's what that is as well. It is. There's no doubt about that. Even if you were to accept the official narrative that this horrible thing came about because of these individuals who have an extremist point of view, who did this, and there were guys with box cutters who terrorized airplanes and caused all this to happen. That is a pretty wild and dark conspiracy theory on its own.
It is, absolutely. And so the easiest thing is just to not even think about it too hard and just sort of move on with your life and hope that it all goes away.
But it does not.
It doesn't. No, I mean, eventually it kind of hits you in the face. I think a lot of the people in the movement, I believe Richard Gage had made sort of had something like that as well, where he was listening to David Ray Griffin, speak, who I listen to all the time. If you want to hear a good, balanced and humorous, critique of the whole 9/11, he is wonderful to listen to. He's all over YouTube. And I believe that Richard had said that listening to David Ray Griffin on Guns and Butter was what made him realize and how horrible he felt at that time, and that it changed his life. Well, that's kind of similar to me, and more people are coming to that conclusion, but it can be life altering for some people. People have lost jobs, people have lost relationships, It's really hard. I mean, even now, like, I'm surrounded by people who love me and like to talk, but they don't really want to talk about 9/11 that much.
No, it's far too uncomfortable.
It's very uncomfortable.
And I remember something about Richard saying that he had heard David Ray Griffin, I think, in 2006. I don't remember the radio program.
It was Guns and Butter.
It may have been Guns and Butter, but to my memory, but I know it was 2006.
Yeah.
And he said that based on his presentation, that's when he started to look at it, from a standpoint where he was utilizing his own professional experience and all that.
Yeah.
And realistically, when it comes to stuff like this, if we begin to examine it from our own perspective and we can find that there's all these kinds of problems, you know, and we begin to work together, we may actually get some results and eventually get the whole truth out there. Now, speaking about the public's viewpoint and all that, look, guys, you are perfectly welcome to call in, and that number is 718-717-8296, I believe. And if you want to join in on the conversation, we'll be more than happy to have you on. If you have any questions or you have anything that you want to say about this, I'll be more than happy to take some calls. Okay. So just so everybody's aware of that.
Right.
And Christine, you don't mind answering some questions,
No,
right?
not at all. No, I'll answer them to the best of my ability, and anything I don't know, I'm certainly willing to look up.
Right. Well, I got you, and I'm planning on having you back again.
That'd be fun.
So that we can discuss some things with a little more of a focused sort of, you know, a little bit more of a focus in general on particular aspects of this.
Sure.
And I'm more than willing to take the input of the audience and create the show based on that. I mean, we could do, you know, an entire show on whatever aspect you guys think needs to be focused on, because this is a huge topic. And, you know, we're obviously not going to cover everything here today. So, I mean, if there's stuff from a political, social, scientific angle, you know, and even beyond Christine, I'll try and find other people that you guys want to hear from. So I want you guys out there to help me build this. Okay. Because, I would like to do a series on 9/11 where we address each of these issues about as best as they can be and, let everybody hear you. So if you guys want to join in, please do call in. All right. So back to where we were. How is it that you actually got involved with doing this Canadian tour and all that?
Well, I have, despite my modest means, and I don't make that much money. I work in a hospital, and I'm a single mom with 2 kids. But the one group that I still do manage to give a donation to was always architects and engineers. Small, mind you, like in sort of the order of $5 or whatever when they've got a campaign going or whatever. And so I also, they have a part on their website that says, do you want to help or volunteer or whatever? And so I just, clicked on that forum and put my name in, and when the Canada tour, started, they looked for people in the particular areas where they were going to volunteer to be event coordinators or volunteers in some way. So that's basically how it happened. And the reason why I choose architects and engineers is because they are very focused and strategic, and they do focus on what they know. And again, I think they're probably in the best position to really put the movement forward and effect some change and put some pressure, to get investigations. So that's how I got it. That's how I got asked. Now that was only about 3 weeks ago. And so I've been working quite hard to try to set up the venues in New Brunswick and, set up a place for Richard to stay. It's very grassroots, he'll be staying at people's homes. It's not at all what some critics have said it was, where Richard is making all this cash or...
That's absolutely another good point that I'd really like you to address, is that, a lot of people say that the guys that are doing this research or trying to do these public appearances are out there trying to make money off of other people's misery, and that's what they're after, is the big bucks, as what do they call that? The homespun industry of conspiracy theory or whatever they call it, and they say that there's all this money to be made in books and your DVDs and all this stuff. And the truth is that most of the time, you end up spending your own money investigating this stuff. And, so I'd really like it if you address that as well.
Well, I mean, I don't know how much an architect makes, but I think that probably, I don't know that this is, anything that's going to replace an architect's salary, to go around and do these presentations. And it's really, I mean, I believe Richard does it because of the cause and because he loves it. I think maybe his costs might be covered and that's about it, and
on some occasions these guys' costs are covered, but I mean, the truth is that when it comes to, somebody trying to get rich off of this kind of stuff,
there's
it's really
no way.
impossible.
No, because everything that they get, they put towards the next campaign. So, they're very good at sending out these notices saying this is the campaign, this is how much we need by this time. Like, when it came with the advertisements on the last 9/11, on September 11th, 2013, they had a fairly large campaign and, they were saving up for advertising in some key cities, in the US, Canada, and I think a couple in Europe and maybe one in Australia. And so you basically give a donation for that. They tell you how much, they tell you when they've gotten to it, and you know that your money has gone to that. And that's it. And I think they may have a small staff, I suppose, to run the organization like any other nonprofit organization would. But it's not a money-making enterprise for individuals. The money comes in to move the movement forward.
Right, and a lot of that money goes toward printing costs and advertising and stuff like that.
Yes, advertising. Yeah, that's right. I mean, they managed to put that great big huge banner across from New York Times. I contributed my $5 towards that a couple of times, I think. So that's where the money's going. So nobody's getting rich off of this.
And even those assistants and that staff and all that, I know that the majority of those people,
modest.
The majority of them are actually volunteers anyway. Like
many of them are
nothing.
I mean, I think I don't know if I imagine the only people, and I'm just saying this, I'm not sure, but I mean, I know something about nonprofit organizations, and generally you pay maybe 2 or 3 people to run the organization, and modestly, not a lot of money. Like, it's a very modest living, and then the rest tend to be volunteers. So I'm not sure exactly how architects and engineers structured, but it's not there to make money for particular individuals. It's really there to promote the real science, the truth.
It's their backing the cause, and at the end of the day, the end result of that cause is to reach the truth, which we've been denied thus far. And, anybody that ever characterizes this as, some sort of money-making scheme and all this other nonsense, I just wanted to make sure that we address that, because I see that as a common thing. There may be guys out there that are able to profit on their books and things, but generally speaking, most of the people that are involved in the true pursuit of the truth are not highly paid and are not even paid at all in most cases.
Many are not, yeah.
I just wanted to make that point, though.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I don't think these people are doing this. Some of them have lost very lucrative jobs, in order to try to promote the truth, especially early on I think it's getting a little easier now to speak out and be part of the movement, but there was a time back, in 2000, probably 3 to 7, maybe something like that, where it was really quite dangerous from a career point of view.
Right.
To do this.
Especially with these professionals who are involved in, some very lucrative professions to begin with. In a lot of cases, your ability to network with other people was damaged by sort of what they deem as your political standpoints. And these things were so radical. I mean, I know that Architects and Engineers has grown quite a bit, and now they're over 2,000 members. I know that.
It's 2,000 professional degreed engineer or architects. It's actually much more who have joined, though. I think it's more than 20,000.
There are a great many. Yeah, there are a great many support members. But what I'm saying is the core of it being the professional architects and engineers. That's right. There's actually over 2,000. Okay, 2,100 at this point.
And growing.
And growing, exactly. So talking about it from a grassroots standpoint, and how awareness is gathered and stuff like this, as an event coordinator, would you like to tell us a little bit about what your event is going to have? I mean, what's going to go on?
Well, basically, we're working on a no budget kind of thing. There's enough money with Rethink 9/11 Canada to get a venue and get Richard to where he needs to be, and then everything else we kind of have to raise the money, or we volunteer our homes for him. And what he's going to do is he's going to give his presentation, probably a similar presentation to what you can find on YouTube, or where he goes through the evidence, and he does a nice job of going through the scientific method and why it's so important to go through the scientific method, and how the fall of the World Trade Centers, the way they were investigated, does not meet the criteria of the scientific method. And then after, I believe what he typically does is takes questions at the end. And then after that, we're going to invite the audience to come out for a beer at a local pub.
That's always good.
Yeah, and that's it. So we're doing Fredericton, St. John, New Brunswick, and Moncton. Those are the New Brunswick cities. And then he goes on to Halifax, and then he ends in St. John's, Newfoundland.
Okay, and that's, let's see, it's starting in, March 13th, I believe? Yeah,
I'd have to, I'm a little behind on exactly what day. I've kind of focused only on my thing, but let me see. Let me see if I can find that here.
No problem. I just was generally just saying that.
Oh, that's good. I should know that, actually.
This will be throughout the country, and there's quite a few dates there. I think it's about, 2 weeks long, something like that.
Yeah. Well, I think, yeah, that's right. Okay, hold on. I found the spreadsheet here. Okay, it looks like on March 13th, Prince George.
Yeah, that's the first stop there.
That's British Columbia, I believe. Vancouver on March 14th. Victoria on March 15th. Edmonton, Alberta on March 16th. Calgary, Alberta on March 17th. Saskatoon, Saskatchewan on March 18th. Winnipeg, Manitoba on March 19th. March 20th is Toronto, Ontario. March 23rd is London, Ontario. March 24th is Ottawa. March 26th is Montreal, Quebec. March 27th is Quebec City in Quebec. And then it's New Brunswick, so March 28th we have Fredericton. March 29th is St. John. March 30th is Moncton. Then March 31st is Halifax. And then April 1st is St. John's, Newfoundland.
Oh, so it's actually March 13th to April 1st.
Yeah, that's right. We did extend it a bit. There was a lot of interest, so we added a few cities and moved St. John to the end, and it did extend it a little bit, yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, I was just really curious about that because, I won't be able to attend these. But if you go to the rethink911.ca website, right, a lot of other details will be there, the exact locations, right?
That's right. And many of these cities are along the border. Like the Canadian population is concentrated along the U.S. border. So some of these cities might be within a driving distance for U.S. citizens. I know that New Brunswick and Maine are very close, and we cross the border a lot, back and forth. And I know that probably that's the case for Montreal and probably Ottawa and Toronto as well. And Vancouver's very close to Seattle. So, there are opportunities for U.S. citizens to come up and watch this presentation as well.
Right. Okay. Well, that's great because, that way, people in this country can go up and see this as well.
Love to have.
Richard is a great presenter, actually.
Yes.
He's usually, one of the guys that, if you're not watching an entire presentation of Richard's, he is often, utilized in clip form by other people to, make points.
Oh, yes.
Especially about the collapse and,
Yes.
then again about the, the stuff in the dust and,
Oh, yeah, the red gray trips and the
yeah, I mean, David Ray Griffin.
the carbon nanotubes, yeah. Yeah, no, his presentation is very compelling, and I think when people watch it, it's hard for them not to rethink, 9/11.
Well, yeah, at the very least, if you go into it with an open mind and you just pop open, a 10-minute piece of Richard Gage on YouTube or something like that, in case you've never seen him before, he'll definitely, if you go into it with an open mind, get you to at least consider, the positions that he's taking, and they're very well thought out and,
oh, yes.
Presented very well. It just occurred to me, though, that as a healthcare worker, because of all the damage and stuff that was done from the people cleaning up Ground Zero. I know I'm jumping around a little bit here.
No, that's okay.
But I kind of wanted to cover this as well. But we were, I know we've been led to believe a lot of things about the contaminants in the dust, and that's another factor that goes into assembling this from the available evidence, as we were talking about before. But, But when you look at those type of aspects here, when you're looking at the damage that was done to the people that were cleaning up the site, the people that were present there, and all of that, what do you glean from that?
Well, that actually keeps me going in a way, because being a healthcare worker and having cared for people for 25 years, something like that, that's what keeps me going for this, because I think that the cost in health and human life has been tremendous, and it needs to be clear why this happened. And I really feel like the people who are suffering, they need to be, they really deserve to be, taken care of properly from healthcare system, and really, I'm not sure that that's happening or not in the U.S. I mean, your healthcare system is different, although I know you're undergoing a lot of change now. But, that does concern me, that people who are in the area who are breathing the dust in, and I understand that they were told that it was safe, but in fact it wasn't, and that some people are suffering from, exposure to carbon nanotubes and perhaps asbestos, because I also understand that maybe the towers were full of asbestos because of when they were built. Mm-hmm. So these are all issues that, are really important, because these things cause a tremendous amount of suffering. And that's what I see, is suffering on a daily basis as a healthcare worker. And not just those people, but the military. I live close to a military base, and I do see military soldiers, who have seen action. Well, Canada was more of a peacekeeper, I think, but still, they see things, and they're exposed to things, and they come home, and, they're not the same, they're changed, and that really keeps me going, that we really need to move forward on this. And I'd like to also quantify maybe and qualify the actual damage in terms of health and years of life lost from 9/11. That might be, I finished all my graduate work for my master's for applied health services research, and I just have a thesis left to write. And I'm thinking of maybe doing something like that, to sort of try to quantify and qualify the health effects. Yeah.
Well, I got to say that it is really, people that also, putting aside the debunkers and all of the, the mainstream chatter and clatter that we deal with about this subject, putting all that aside, a lot of times people say, you're still discussing 9/11, you're still discussing these things that occur. And one of the things that you mentioned briefly was the fact that we did get the Patriot Act out of this. We end up with the NDAA and all these other things that grew from sort of the BS bed that was laid down with this 9/11 situation. And I think that the relevance here about 9/11 in general is that what grew from there has really festered into something else. And it's relevant to all of us at this point because of these wars, these incursions. These are, and I've always had an issue with this because, you just taking it from a human standpoint, we're taking, young men and women who are supposed to serve, for our defense, who are supposed to serve their country.
Yeah.
And to me, it is one of the most disgraceful and dishonorable things that has been done to those individuals who have basically, turned their lives, turned their well-being over for the sake of the greater good, to allow them to be constantly utilized in wars that are supposed to be justified by these types of things. And when the initial justification is something that is so completely misunderstood as those events, isn't it just a terrible disservice that we're doing to each and every one of those individuals? And not only that, but, the indigenous populations of these other places, or the people that belong to these nations that we're going into, and not even just the big headline places like the Afghanistans and the Iraqs, but the individuals whose lives and nations and entire ways of being are destroyed.
Yes.
Over something that started with perhaps the justifications changed, perhaps the motivations or the supposed motivations have been altered for public consumption. Yeah. But the reality is that when we begin to incur into these places and real lives are lost and real everything is lost for some people and populations in general, shouldn't we at the very least have a clear understanding of where this started? And if the incursions all throughout the Middle East, which was something that, up until, we could go back into the history of this and really discuss it, but not now, because we all know where this started. And we all know about when we as a military entity, and I do mean we by the United States, became so entrenched in this stuff. When you think about that, if the true motivations were not what occurred on 9/11, what were they? And these are the big, huge questions that sometimes they have led to some very wild and irresponsible speculation on some people's parts. But,
well, you know what? I feel like, even the wild speculations, at the end of the day, if they're out there, transparent and peer reviewed, we're going to be able to sort out what's reasonable and what isn't. I've always kind of encouraged any speculation at all, because what will happen is that what is true will actually come out as being true, based on our ability to sort of figure out what makes good sense, what's good evidence, things like that. And the things that aren't so much are going to be they're going to be shown as untrue or unlikely or whatever. So I don't really mind so much people talking about it, but I think people need to examine things critically. I think what's really missing from us right now is critical thinking. It's not so much that, you can have a whole bunch of things, choices or information in front of you, but you need to assess it critically to sort of figure out what is reasonable, what is well-researched, what is well-founded, and what isn't. And that's what I think has been completely missing when it comes to 9/11. And I think at the very least we owe the people who have gone into service to protect, the U.S. and North America, for whatever the reason behind it was. They do deserve to be properly taken care of, especially if they've suffered, and their families.
And yes, and I absolutely agree with that. And I got to tell you that I also believe that, because another criticism which is often heaped upon people like myself that want to openly discuss a lot of this stuff is that we are being disrespectful in some way, or or we're being ghoulish about discussing these things in such a manner. I think that you're doing a disservice to the people who have died, who have sacrificed in various ways, whether it was the civilian deaths that day or the military deaths that resulted.
No, they deserve a real proper investigation that's based on evidence and science, just like any other people who have died from unfortunate circumstances or whatever. I mean, they deserve a proper investigation. Whatever the outcome, they deserve that, at least.
Absolutely true. And, anything that has not occurred from a natural, instance that, where anyone is harmed in any way, you do a serious disservice to the victims of it. And I count, like I say, the military as victims of the 9/11 whirlwind that has been built up, over the years. And, this is without precedent in my lifetime anyway, to my mind, the amount of, disservice that has been done to people in general over this. And again, it is the honor, it is to me so much more honorable to demand clear and concise answers to these types of questions instead, or on behalf of, let's just say, those victims and those people that had all been in some way or other affected, whether they be the family members or they be the witnesses or they be the, like I say, the people in other lands that have now had to, have their lives, their beings altered, destroyed, damaged, killed, whatever. It is a much greater service that we do to them to demand the real answers as to what really happened that day.
Transparency needs to.
Right. Transparency is an absolute must. Yeah. And I do say that, and I've said it before, and you and I never had this conversation, but critical thinking has been something that has been lost. And this is why a lot of this noise, I do disagree a little, though, that some of the wild and outrageous theories that have been allowed to flourish, they need to be answered.
They will. No, I agree with that. That's what I'm saying, though. They will be. Like, if you're open and transparent and you're actually analyzing and evaluating all theories, everything that comes out, then they will be shown for what they are. If they're good, then they will be part of the evidence towards the movement. If they're bad, they won't. I don't necessarily think that not talking about them is going to achieve anything either. But there's a lot of straw men out there, but I like to expose those now. I find that that's actually quite helpful to the movement to really expose the straw men. So when people bring up things that are just really not plausible, no matter who they are, I think it's a good opportunity for us to expose that and to talk about that and then talk about what really is much more likely an explanation rather than some of what we might consider wild theories. I mean, there's a few out there. I don't really have a huge opinion on them, but I would certainly be willing, one thing I'd be willing to do is look into them seriously and just say, yeah, I just don't think that the evidence supports that. I don't think that the science is behind it. And so,
but one of the emerging tactics that I've got to say that occurs with a lot of these movements is that there is sort of a straw man from within and without that are constructed, and sometimes they create so many of them, and they are in such abundance that many people that are being serious and are attempting to critically evaluate this as individuals often get lost in a sea of this stuff.
It's true, but I think that they will be exposed over time. I think that's actually kind of a good sign that we're actually getting somewhere. They wouldn't bother doing that if they didn't feel threatened by the movement. And eventually, I mean, it's true, they're going to, convince a few people, influence a few people in maybe in a direction that is not based on evidence, but we can bring them back, We just have to keep moving forward on it.
So in general, you would say that you have an optimistic viewpoint as to exactly the strength of the results that are going to come from all of this.
Yeah, I really do. I really think that now is a really pivotal moment for the movement. I think a lot more people are feeling enough time has passed that I think some of the psychological and social barriers are going to lessen. And, you know, the whole world is talking about it. In Europe, this is spoken of openly. Australia, Canada, a little less so, but, you know, still, we talk about it. And even the U.S., you know, absolutely there are people who are talking about it, and it's more acceptable to talk about it now. And when I kind of read some of these comments from these people who are kind of just name calling still and, you know, calling us truthers or twoofers or whatever, it's really weak. Like, it's really becoming very transparent and weak, their arguments. Like, if that's the best they've got, I think we're in good shape moving forward.
Well, we do have one thing on our side, and that is an honest desire to seek the reality and the honesty of what occurred. You know, whether it is somehow or other, although I don't personally believe this, but to be honest with you, if I could find the evidence that the official narrative were true, I would accept that and then understand a great many other things that have occurred since. But the fact is that since that keeps falling down, I mean from every single direction.
Oh, I know. It's a nightmare.
You know, I have personally sought to seek as many different avenues as I could to arrive at a clear understanding of what is one of the most significant things to ever occur in my lifetime.
That's right.
And I definitely think that it is not, you know, some sort of, you know, vulgar fascination that I have with, you know, massive casualties or, you know, some sort of, you know, just academic sort of reach.
Or that you're an America hater or something.
Yeah, and by no stretch of the imagination was I somebody that, you know, wanted to be anti-American, but
no,
I'm not.
And it's not being anti-American, it's being anti-crime, people with power, you know, just basically getting away with what they want because they have the means to do so. It's not anti-American at all, I don't feel, you know, to question these things. No. Everybody's anti-crime.
In fact, well, whether you are or not, I think it is uniquely patriotic, in fact, to hold your government accountable and to desire that those who are truly responsible for criminal activity be shown to be truly responsible for criminal activity and eventually exposed, punished, in fact. And I think that this is part of the process, and it is rather unfortunate that the people that we were supposed to entrust again did not do their jobs. And
it seems so.
Their lack of diligence is not going to be answered by those of us on this side with a lack of vigilance.
Yeah.
You know, we are going to continue to do this. We're going to continue to demand some answers. We're going to continue to stay on top of this from every angle. And I find it interesting, although architects and engineers is the featured thing we're talking about here, there are others who are approaching it from other standpoints. You mentioned David Ray Griffin, who has a rather multifaceted approach.
Oh, yes. No, he puts everything into perspective really well in very easy to understand terms and humorous terms. I mean, I love listening to him.
Yeah, he makes it very palatable, very, very relatable, I guess, is the word I'm searching for. And this is,
Well, he makes you think, wow, like, that's true. That does seem pretty ridiculous, He puts it in a way where you're like, oh, wow, how could I even believe that,
Yeah, it's catching that one little fact that he, that he glosses, like the mainstream media kind of would mention it and gloss over it really quick and go on to the conclusion. I always found that kind of stuff, blaringly obvious, in so many cases, where you have these sort of controversial issues, well, this and this occurred, but don't look at that because look, this is what we're actually on to,
That's right.
Like, the idea of, the guy's paperwork surviving, the steel structured building. Yeah. The steel structured building could not survive the fire, but this guy's passport from whatever country it was supposedly from allegedly survives long enough to land on the ground in New York City.
Yeah, that seems pretty far out there. It's almost brazen to even say that, I think, to even suggest that such a thing is possible. And yet, we believed it. I remember hearing that and thinking, wow, that's like really bizarre. But then you just move on with your life. And, again, it's like, once you actually look at it and critically examine it, which I encourage everybody to do, don't take my word for it, don't take anybody's word for it, look at the evidence yourself. And then use your own knowledge and your own, basis in reality to decide what is actually likely and what isn't. And if you need to do a little study on a few little things, then do so. But you don't have to take anybody's word for it. If you do a really good job of just kind of critically examining everything around that day, you really start to sort of sort out what is realistic and what is just completely unrealistic and is just so close to being impossible. Like passports surviving plane crashes when buildings did not, it's
right.
And just those two, by the way, not the other people,
Yeah, of course, and the idea that there was no way that, planes could have been intercepted when, there's all kinds of issues here.
Yeah,
one of the fascinating things that I know you're interested in and, I started to look at, but I haven't really gotten deeply into it is, there's a consensus 9/11.
That's the, okay, yes. I've got that website here. Hold on.
Well, I found it interesting because, this is sort of an attempt to begin to assemble a lot of these things.
That's right. Basically, like, for instance, in the medical field, there's often conflicting evidence on what works, what doesn't, what causes what. Things aren't always all that clear. And what they've done is they've developed a way to come up with recommendations and consensus statements. And they've basically applied the same methodology to the 9/11. The different studies, research, and evidence for 9/11. And it is called Consensus 9/11. Yeah, that's what it is.
Consensus 9/11. And in fact, one of the things that...
.org.
Oh, that's consensus911.org.
.org, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I found that interesting because peer review would be one of those pieces of the methodology, because you mentioned peer review before, and that's commonly used in scientific journals.
Well, actually, you can't get published in a scientific journal, even open ones. Anything reputable has a peer review. Like, when you're submitting an article, many experts read it, and then they send it back to you and want you to change lots of stuff. Like, it's really rigorous.
Right. In forensics or any of these, applied sciences.
If you want to publish, yes.
If you want to publish something where, when you read these, well, there was a study published in the New England Journal of Medicine or whatever, this kind of stuff, any of these reputable journals, like you're saying, there's a peer review process where other individuals who are experts, in other words, you're presenting yourself as having an expert idea or an expert, sort of, representation of a particular condition or event or whatever. You submit that through, and other experts check it.
They check the methodology. They check lots of things. Now, there have been problems in the past. There's been a bias towards positive results, and, you know, there have been some conflicts of interest, and that's why they've changed a lot of these articles, especially for medicine. I'm not sure what's going on with social sciences, but for medicine, you have to declare any financial dealings you may have with any of the companies you may have done research on. For instance, if you're doing a research on a drug or something. Also, drug companies, for instance, now I believe have to actually register every single drug trial. And that way, whether they have a positive or negative result, they have to publish. And that's the way it's going. And that's what's important for 9/11 as well, for that to be the case, because otherwise what you get is a bias towards one particular opinion, one particular outcome.
Well, again, transparency is one of the conditions that they seek. And of course, that makes...
We're trying to become more transparent in research and in the peer review system and in publishing. Mm-hmm. And so that's basically, you know, it's had problems in the past, obviously, but that is the best that we can do to sort of figure out a good way of figuring out what is reliable, what we can count on, what might be true, what needs further research.
Well, there's various ways. There's various ways of testing the validity of one's research or conclusions, and I'm just saying that that's one of the mechanisms that's utilized here. And
well, that's the way to put it out there to the public, so that others can weigh in on it. That's really the only way. So if you have something important, no matter what way you chose to do it, if you want to have input and to have transparency, you must go through that in order to have others weigh in on it and replicate try to get the same results and do the exact same thing you do to see if they got the same or approach it from a different way. That's how science is done in the social sciences, in the physical sciences, in psychology, all of these different things. That's kind of the idea, is that you do something, you put it out there, it gets critiqued, it gets, people will agree, disagree, but that's part of it. That's the important part, and sometimes you'll be proven wrong, and then, so somebody else will prove you wrong based on their study, and then all of these studies come together, and eventually you have something that you might consider true, or evidence, or reliable. That's what has to happen with 9/11. And that's kind of what the consensus 9/11 is sort of doing in a way. What they wind up doing is looking at evidence and then making statements that they think are likely to be true. And so, that's kind of like the medical model where, you know, they've got enough studies under their belts, enough peer review to be able to say something like, okay, we're going to test diabetes using this test now because we have found there's been enough studies behind it to show that this is better. That's kind of what they're doing with the consensus 9/11 in a way. They're synthesizing, bringing together all of the different studies, evidence, opinions, and then making sort of statements of agreement. So that's what that is.
Right. Thus the word consensus. Yeah, I got you. Well, that was interesting to me because honestly, that was one of those web resources that I wasn't even aware of until very recently. There are lots of them out there, and using your own critical thinking and trying to filter your way through these things becomes a really large, time-consuming job for some people.
It does.
And, you know, I just want to try and encourage people to not simply give up because it seems so overwhelming. That there are, you know, various ways that you can sort of assemble for yourself.
Sure.
You know, you don't have to just simply take someone's presentation and say, okay, I buy it, let's go.
No.
You know, that's exactly the wrong thing to do, and that's what's leading a lot of people to misinformation and disinformation regarding this stuff. And sometimes it's purposefully done, and sometimes it's, I hate to use the word honest, but an honest mistake.
It might be good faith.
it may be a conclusion which is being presented in good faith.
Sure.
And, I challenge my own stuff as often as I can before I make, sort of larger statements about this kind of stuff. At least that's what I'm trying to do. I got to tell you.
Yeah.
And it's not always easy, and mistakes are made.
Absolutely. Well, that's the thing, is that with this movement, it's like we want to challenge the official narrative, but we challenge ourselves too. I mean, architects and engineers don't all get together and say, hey, we're just going to agree on this and this is the end of it. Like, they challenge, they put it out there. Others challenge them. That's how it's supposed to work. We don't expect that we're going to challenge the official narrative and we're never going to be challenged. It's just, if you're going to challenge the science, you have to bring science and evidence to the table. And that's what the official narrative is having trouble doing. But, we're all open to that. All of these studies need to be looked at critically. And you have to apply critical thinking to everything you do, and then you can make decisions, based on the critical thinking you've done. That's just an important part of any process. And I think that for people who are sort of trying to figure out what they can do, I think certainly if you want to focus your efforts, I think probably architects and engineers is well placed to make some real change. But if you live in New York City, you really want to consider the High-Rise Safety Initiative, signing that. Now, people who don't live in New York don't have the option of doing that. But people who do should seriously consider doing so. If you don't live in New York, I think you can still donate to their campaign so that they can help people learn about it in New York. And I guess the other thing would really be the architects and engineers. And there's a few other organizations as well. But if you want to, don't want to get overwhelmed and just want to contribute a little bit, architects and engineers is probably the best as far as who's moving things forward, who's doing the advertising, who's getting press, who's getting out there and doing presentations, who's really pushing the envelope.
And making real attempts to hold some of the people that are responsible for these conclusions that are absolutely atrocious, to actually hold them accountable, to make them answer, some of these glaring errors in their presentations.
They have to back up their claims. They have to back up their claims just like the rest of us. We can't just go around claiming things and making stuff up. You have to back it up, and that's what architects and engineers and other organizations are asking them to do. It's uncomfortable for them, but that's all it is. It's really just back up your claim. You say that this can happen. Let's see it. Let's see the studies. Let's see the tests, put it out there. And that's the scientific method. That's the way it works, That's why it works.
Well, tell you what, we have a little bit of time left, and I wanted to make sure that we mention again that the main website. I always mix this up because I just enter AE911 Truth, I think, into my browser there, and I think it's .org would be the home for that, right?
Hold on. Okay. Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth is .org, yeah.
Okay. So that's where you can take a look at the general sort of mission of that organization.
Yeah.
In particular, though, the Rethink 9/11 .ca.
Yeah. And I think there's a .org as well, because there's a CA one and there's the US one. So there's both. So I'm associated with the CA one. But I think it's .org. I suppose I could put it into my browser here and tell you. Rethink911.org. Yeah, okay. So it's rethink.911.org. That was the original one.
Right.
And rethink911.ca has come as well. And who knows, there might be others in other countries. I'm not sure.
Right, and there's other ways to reach the architects and engineers. They have a Facebook page.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
I know that there's a lot of presentations on YouTube that, like I say, other people utilize, Richard Gage especially, but other presentations that you guys have done have been utilized, either in clip form or in whole form.
Well, I recommend the Toronto hearings as far as getting a good overall feel for what the evidence is, because this was in front of a panel. It's a couple of years old now, so a few things may have changed. I don't think a lot has changed, but if you want a good overall view of where the evidence is, not only from a physics and chemistry point of view or buildings point of view, but also from the psychology and the sociology and the politics, watching the 9/11 hearings, 9/11, I think Toronto hearings is what it's called, is really helpful. And if you really want to get into the real nitty-gritty of the presentations, there's uncut versions of each presenter. And I'm trying to think who my favorite presenter is of that, but I like them all. They were all compelling. And the thing is when they were presenting, if you're watching the uncut ones, at the end, they get questioned by the panels. These questions are not easy. They get challenged big time. So.
Right. Well, there's like I think it's a 5-hour overview on YouTube.
That's right. And it was like a 4 or 5 day conference. And they don't include the questioning in the 5-hour YouTube video. But if you want to watch some of the questioning of the presenters in the uncut versions of each one, it's really interesting. You know, it really makes you realize that this is not just like, people don't just present and everybody goes, oh yeah, okay, yep, that's what it is. Let's move on. It's not that at all. It's like, well, what about this claim you made? And what about that? And what do you think of this? And they grill them, and rightly so. And they have to back up their claims, and that's what they do. And that's why I really like the Toronto hearings.
Not just partial to them because they happened in Canada, though, right?
Not at all. I mean, I think they happen in Canada just for logistic reasons. You know, most of these are not Canadians. You've got Congresswoman Cynthia McKinney presenting. You've got Barbara Honegger. You've got, Kevin Ryan, of course, Richard Gage. And a couple of them were Canadian, like Professor McQueen, Graham McQueen. He is McMaster, but his presentation is outstanding and stuff that you never hear in the media. And you've got, many more. Lance DeHaven Smith, I think his name is. Very interesting political take. So this is mostly American with a few international people and Canadians presenting to an international panel. So no, it's not that it was in Toronto. It's really just that good. Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't had
synthesis of everything, where we stand on the evidence.
Right. And it's just, so in your opinion, that's definitely the best place to go for an absolute overview of the evidence the way it is, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Now it did take place in 2011. So it's, that's 2.5 years old. But that's not that old. I don't believe that much has changed. So, it's an excellent primer on the evidence base for what actually happened on 9/11. And it doesn't just include the science. So if you're more inclined to the political aspect, there's lots of that. If you're more inclined to the psychology of it, there's a psychologist talking about it, talking about why people have so much trouble accepting that it might not be the way that they say. There's the Congresswoman, of course, and there's another Congressperson, I believe. So there's something for everyone.
Yeah, I've seen Cynthia McKinney speak about a lot of issues.
Yes.
And, I always found her to be, rather fascinating. And,
I think she took a major political hit because of it. I mean, she lost. She's not in politics anymore, I don't believe. I mean, she really stood out to be counted and took a personal hit professionally, I believe.
Right, which she did in quite a few cases.
That's right, yeah. So, I mean, that's the kind of bravery that was really required, especially early on, in the early days. That's what it took. And those were the prices that people paid. Big sacrifices,
Right, this was not just, the Toronto hearings that you're talking about was not just, a sort of a cavalcade of conspiracy theorists or the typical characters.
No, these are professionals. They're professors. They're really well respected in their field. These are people, when they're making claims, you want to really listen and are willing to be challenged. That's the thing, is that a person who's really interested in finding the truth and figuring out, what is good evidence, they are open to be challenged, because that's what it's about,
Okay, well, like I said, we are kind of winding down now. Is there anything that we didn't get to tonight that you wanted to get out there, or?
Well, let me see if I can find another website I think might be helpful.
Well, I know we talked about
the Journal of 9/11 Studies.
Journal of 9/11 Studies, okay.
Yeah, that's one that also, if you really want to kind of get into it a little more from a reading perspective, the Journal of 9/11 Studies is good. It's journal911studies.com. And there's no slash between 9 and 11. And they've done it in a nice way. There's sort of a section you can click on that's called Beginners. And then it sort of takes you through some of the things to start you off, And interestingly, they start with the videos of World Trade Center 7, because I believe that's probably the most compelling thing that you can watch.
Yeah, it's definitely it's definitely a profound example of.
It's just so obvious what it is. And most people don't know about it, so it's like, wow, that really happened on that day? So that's a good start. So they basically go through, for instance, they start, if you click the beginners, you get videos of World Trade Center 7, read about the failure to defend the skies, read about the 9/11 Commission report, its omissions and distortions. So that would be based on David Ray Griffin's work, I assume. Mm-hmm. The Family Steering Committee response, because that was huge. I mean, the families involved pushed very, very hard for a real investigation and still have not.
That was something we didn't really touch on when we were talking about the victims, is that the families of the dead had really spoke out at the beginning, and for quite a while, trying to demand answers. And realistically, they were not heard or not, not replied to in any sort of a.
Vilified.
They were also vilified.
It's like quit complaining, blah, 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 I'm sick of hearing you. Like that, these things were actually said on TV and on the radio.
I remember some right-wing guy, and I can't remember who he was, but it was one of these typical puppet heads, so they all kind of blur together for me. The fact is, the guy was sitting there saying, listen, no disrespect intended, but isn't it time you got over it? Yeah. I literally remember hearing that come out of somebody's mouth, and I don't recall what TV channel it was, and like I said, these guys are a blur to me, but I remember hearing that and saying to myself, man, isn't that the most disgusting thing that you could possibly say,
Well, the thing is that there's been no closure. I mean, it's one thing, you can move on more easily if you've actually had closure. If one of your children is murdered and or missing, and you never find out who or why, you can never really move on. And that's what these families are asking for. The truth, what happened, and then they would be able to move on. I mean, you never really get over it, but you can at least move on, and at least you understand what's happened. They've been deprived of this. They've been stripped of this. And it's generally a right. Like usually when you lose a loved one to something so suspicious, or some accident or whatever you want to call it, usually you get a reason, you get an investigation, you get some sort of closure. If somebody murders your child, the police try to find him, and he goes to court and hopefully goes to jail. This did not happen. I mean, they went after bin Laden, and that's that. Afghanistan, and then it's all fuzzy, like nobody really got a real investigation. They said, this is who it is, and that's it, and there's no more talking about it, and that's it.
Right, and it seems to me that what is lacking here is a real, actual, justice.
Yeah,
justice is the only word Justice is the only word that I can think
There's
of.
been no justice.
And that was denied to not only the families of the victims from exactly that day, but all of the ongoing victims that, in my opinion, came sort of, grew, like I said, from that flower bed, sort of gestated, grew. I don't even know what the words I'm looking for are here. But the thing is that this stuff all sort of evolved from the seeds that were laid that day. And I think that there was never, in not giving proper answers, proper investigations, and honest transparency to any of those events and the following events, that so much is lost when it comes to a concept of justice, when it comes to a concept of being moral or realistically, looked after by the people that we elected or appointed or whatever to do those kinds of things for us. And that is the most sickening thing here, is that the people that were supposed to do their jobs here to inform us, protect us, show us, reveal for us, seek justice for us, not a single one of them, in my opinion, did their job entirely. Otherwise, we would not still be stuck with these types of questions and the need for citizens to rise up and begin to do their own investigations, to begin to create their own grassroots movements and campaigns. It wouldn't be necessary if these people were doing their jobs.
Yeah, no, it's true.
It's not a matter of, who it is needs to get fired because they're incompetent. There is no way that such a massive amount of obfuscation, deception, secrecy, and distraction, the weapons of mass distraction are huge. They are numerous beyond normal recommended levels of reality. And here we sit with only people trying to act for themselves, trying to come around and do the jobs that should have been done in the first place.
Yeah, it's true.
And
how much time do we have, Chuck?
We are almost done. In fact, we'll probably hear my little music coming up in the next couple of minutes here. Did you have something else you wanted to add?
Well, it's just I kind of have an analogy to the Building 7.
Go for it.
I don't know if I have enough time, but I sort of made a health sort of analogy. So you imagine that you have just lost a loved one, and he died suddenly after complaining of a sore throat or something like that. Something innocuous anyway. And you had looked in his throat, and it was a bit red, but nothing overly alarming. So this is kind of like Building 7, right? Then about an hour later, he dies suddenly. You call an ambulance, and he's taken to hospital and pronounced dead on arrival. You're in shock and traumatized. How could this have happened? He didn't appear that sick. Are the others in your home, like your children, at risk? You just want answers. You explain in detail everything that preceded the event to the doctors. You're assured that the pathologist will get to the bottom of it. A few days later, you follow up with the pathologist, and he says he thinks that the sore throat caused the sudden death, that it was so painful that it overwhelmed his body and caused him to collapse suddenly, probably from shock. This is based on a computer model, not on an autopsy, as they didn't feel an autopsy was necessary. In fact, without your permission, they sent the body for cremation, which is presumably illegal to do so, at least in two ways: cremating a body without next of kin permission and not thoroughly investigating something that could endanger others in the household or the public at large. So you asked for the findings so you can have them examined by another pathologist. And after a 5-year delay and a lot of threatening, the hospital administration, they release a summary report which you show to your pathologist who asks for more information. Specifically, what data did they use in this model? You're told after another long delay that the details of their model cannot be released, as to do so might jeopardize public health and safety. You're incensed, shocked, and disillusioned as you still don't know what happened. They basically say he died of overwhelming pain from sore throat, just as the original pathologist had said. And what you find eventually when they do release the model is that they basically said that the level of pain was so extreme at 10. That's what they imported, that the level of pain was really high, and you know that it wasn't. It was only a 2, and that the mechanism of death was that his tonsils had ulcerated to the extent of causing extreme pain signals in the nearby spinal cord, which overwhelmed his brain and caused pain.
I'm sorry for that.
Webcam microphone up close. Webcam microphone up close.
At the age of 19 in 1962, she was a...
See, but I have the files. You know, I read this stuff at the National Archives, and I read these other things. I said to myself, how can that be possible? The brain, you know, pistols and the final slap of choice, I don't know when that was, it doesn't really matter. Internet, professional wrestlers, and not Jesse Ventura style. It doesn't matter where the cartoon comes from as long as it's real. It doesn't, it's hard to get real information. Because here,